we're getting a lot of students and families right now from Afghanistan who are getting placed in the Charlottesville area. So a little bit about what inspired our program when we first got started. In April of 2020, we had a parent conversation that went out with our Latinx parent group. And we were asking, what help do you all need now that we have moved to virtual instruction? Because in March 13th was our last day in school. And then we were remote. And, at that point, we didn't know what education was going to look like at that point. And one of the biggest things that the parents said was that they needed help navigating the technology that their students were using, whether it was helping troubleshoot devices, whether it was understanding all of the different programs and tools that we were using, and each one had a separate login information, like all of these little bits and pieces. And the language barrier was a problem because a lot of times when stuff was going home or when information was coming out from Schoology or from Seesaw, it wasn't necessarily in their language or in their language or vocabulary that they could understand. So that became one of the big issues. And we learned that our families were looking for a partnership, not just to be rescued. They didn't want this stuff just done for them. They wanted someone to partner with them and teach them how to do this so that they could help their students.
I'll add to that even for us, sometimes we run into the thing where that's a mind shift in some ways, where you're realizing the difference between a partnership and a collaboration versus us rescuing someone. Partnership and collaboration, embedded in it, has the idea that other people are bringing things to the table as well. And you're going to take advantage of those things. And we're going to bring our resources together in a partnership way.
So we worked collaboratively with our families to navigate our new reality at the time and to create new structures. And we asked the question, what could it look like to offer families across the division positive connection and communication in their home languages? Like, how could we proactively make this shift to help our families?
That led to an additional question, which was, what can we offer our families without asking anything in return, right? And so we started thinking about these things when we were looking at events. What's the purpose of our events? We asked that question. When families realize that you are consistently offering these opportunities, then they participate and they spread the word. What we've noticed when we've done ours is that the numbers for each one of these fluctuates, but the empowerment that we're giving people stays the same. And I don't know how some people do measuring their criteria, but one of the things that I love about working with Charlie and the other people we work with is that they took to heart realizing that if it was, whether it was 5 families or 50 families coming, exactly, it didn't matter. We were moving in the right direction and we're helping people. And then we would start to see people that were repeaters for some of the things we were doing. And then we would also start to see new faces and people were spreading the word, talking about what we were doing. And we realized even then that we were on to something that was desperately needed from the people we were serving. Or in that case, we weren't fully serving.
So the ESOL department partnered with the Department of Technology with this in mind, that access not only to digital tools, but also to the internet and mentors who know how to use the digital tools are essential for these innovations and family engagement to succeed. So it became, how can we partner with ESOL, with interpretation, to make sure that they have access to the people that they need to ask questions from. So with our purpose, technology is the vehicle, but empowerment is the theme. Because within our events, as things have started to shift and grow and change, we cover topics with families like how to empower them to ask questions from their teachers, empowering them for how to email and communicate with their school admin or with teachers, how to just communicate, ask for needs, get the help that they need, and feel comfortable doing so.
That I think about that for me. I live next door to a guy who speaks 5 different languages. He's bringing a lot to the table, but, right? But there are also things where, like, some of the idioms that we have for the English language. So when he's conversing with me or even with my kids, it's interesting sometimes to hear the different nuances in the conversation. And for me, what I think about is if you stuck me in the middle of Mexico, where I know very limited Spanish, I could do a lot in America. I'm bringing a lot to the table, but all of a sudden, if I'm in the middle of Mexico, I've got a barrier. And so began to realize, again, going back to this idea of realizing that people are bringing things to the table, and it's part of our responsibility to help them unlock what they're bringing to the table and help them thrive in the environment where they find themselves right now. And that's essential. And that's part of what, when we keep talking about empowerment, that is a huge piece to this whole thing.
And just like when you're lesson planning for instruction, technology is not the focus of the instruction, right? It's what you're using to help enhance learning. So it's what we're using to help increase family engagement with our ESOL families. So some of our gains, we got an increased comfort level for families when interacting with teachers and school staff. Schools reported that they were having more interaction from ESOL families, even in things like PTO, parent-teacher conferences, all of these things that parents were more likely to attend. Schools developed strong relationships with their families. They got to really know the families behind the students and the specific circumstances that brought students to our schools, which when you're talking about students who are coming from places where they've had interrupted education, where they may have not been to school at all, right? Or the parents may have never even attended formal education either. It increased that relationship to the point where now these families are having a positive association with what formal education looked like. We also saw technology literacy increased, as did support of students during at-home learning, which was a big equity piece for us, because then it wasn't just the students who had no language barriers or no issues at all, who had the adult beside them helping them during the day during virtual learning. Now, these students had that supportive adult who understood a little bit more and could help them with it too. Technology learning became part of family culture. We would have whole families attending our nights together to learn a new tool. And then it became this fun thing where the students would recognize each other and they were waving to each other. They were recognizing us, but it was a very safe space for parents to ask questions. There was no wrong question or silly question to ask. We also increased language learning support for all family members. We talked about tools such as BrainPop ELL for our younger students and Imagine Learning, but then we also covered Duolingo, which is free for any adult to use. And we presented Duolingo in an interesting way, that it wasn't just to help these family members learn English, but it was also something that their students could use to maybe learn their home language better, to communicate with grandparents back home. Right. So, like, it can be used for any type of language learning support.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll add to it was that part of what we started doing and doing these things was putting the presentations together. So if you're going to repeat or do this somewhere else, one of the things is just check with us and see if we already have a slide deck. We'll be happy to share it with you for the different things that we've done. And we have things in our resources, but there are probably going to be other things that are not in the resources. So if you were asking about it, just ask us. And again, I just want to make sure that I know we've said it a couple of times, but I just want to make sure that everybody is really on board with the idea that not just the difference between somebody coming along and we are helping them in a way that, like, we got to continually keep helping them versus empowering them with the help that we're providing. So the difference in a collaboration and a partnership. And one of the things that I discovered was that there are a lot of people talking about how relationships matter. And one of the things that I saw as we were doing this was just even the whole ownership of their school and the things that, like, all of that stuff started changing when when we came out from a partnership aspect. It was like, it wasn't us and them, it was, we are doing some things together and they're coming alongside. And one of the people that does a lot of research, and I put a link in it, it's on, if you, when you get the presentation, it'll be slide 8. But Lydia Brezis is the director of, it's like, she does a lot of ELL stuff online, so she's got a ton of resources. So I would check out her website. But one of the things she said was the better that schools knew their families, the more effective their school family partnerships around distance learning became. And we know this, right? Like, the better you know someone, the better you're going to fit and work and do the things that they need and provide for them. And so relationships matter in this whole thing, right? And I remember one of the things that you shared was that after probably one of the first ones when I was joining it, was that the response over and over again was, "You're doing this for us?"
They don't understand the grad.
Well, they were just so, they were so
Yeah.
grateful that
Yeah.
because, and we felt like we were just doing the bare minimum of
Right.
trying to help them understand how to get their children logged into school each day. But they were so grateful for just that piece. And then that made us realize, like, oh, we have really been missing something
Yeah.
major for a while. And then as the shift happened for us going back to in-person learning, we shifted to going over specific topics and things like that each time. And we would tailor, we'll get into this a little bit more here in a bit, we would tailor it to times of year. So it might be that at one point we're helping navigate online college applications for students, or talking about ESOLs, things like that, depending on the time of the year.
Yeah, and like at the beginning of the year, it was learning management system. So it was like, we did stuff with Seesaw and we did stuff with Schoology, which are our 2 platforms. And I want to lead into this one. One of the things that I noticed, and this was an advertisement that came in our VISTI thing, but it was a little flyer that just talked about how ed tech use has rapidly increased, right? And so one of the things that I've seen on my end is that even though this part is happening, that number up there on the board talks about the number. This is a nationwide survey that was done. And I put the links in the slide deck as well. But the Department of Education did this nationwide survey. And what they found was that 79% of teachers were not assigning things that dealt with what we would call this additional technology. They were shying away from it because the students they were reporting access issues with the technology. And that was just from a teacher perspective of them looking at their students and saying, this is what I'm seeing. That number could possibly be a lot higher if you were to actually talk to the families and do the survey that way. But all that to say, though, is that going forward, the technology and our reliance on technology doesn't seem to be going away. But what was happening and what we were seeing on our end was that our users, especially from our ESOL population, were being left behind. They were being left behind.
So less is more. One of the things that we learned very much in the beginning was not to let perfection get in the way of progress. It does not have to be perfect. Just find a place to start and start there. You can grow it, you can add to it, you can change it, and it can evolve as your parents need it to, as your teachers need it to, but just start somewhere. And we also learned very quickly not to assume a level of knowledge, because, and we have recordings from our earlier meetings linked that you will see, like we talked about. So you'll click on this link, and then at the end, we were like, any questions? And this poor parent was like, what do you mean by click on the link? What does that mean? So don't assume a level of knowledge, because that can make family members just stop engaging with it because they're like, oh, I'm already not sure what to do.
And the other piece, and then I'll take your question too. The other thing that I would share with you as well is that the less is more also deals with your platforms that you're bringing home. So for example, just think about how this plays out. if you're a parent and you have a son or a daughter at the high school platform that we use is Schoology, right? So there's one platform they've got to learn. Then they go to their English class and they're doing this really cool thing with Flipgrid, right? So now they've got Schoology, Flipgrid, right? Then they go to the math class and they're using Delta Math for their software. There's a third thing. And you see how this escalates and escalates. You go to, so a kid could conceivably have 8 different platforms just themselves.
And then if they have an elementary aged sibling, then it's, instead of using a computer, now they have an iPad. Then there's Google Drive, there's Brain Pop, there's Seesaw, there, like all of these different things with a different login for each one. And when logging into a program is already something that can be a little bit intimidating, if you have all of these, your chances of them getting used effectively, if work's being sent home with them, drops.
And in our first session, we had a guy share how he was working with the robotics team, and they had to have an email in order to do the application for, I guess it was regionals or state. But that was a barrier. And so these are things that maybe we weren't necessarily thinking about or aware of, but part of being in a relationship with our families, we started to realize that these things are things that are very real to them and they're barriers. And in my brain, what I started thinking about was how many barriers are going to be in front of me before I finally decide, you know what, I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like how many hurdles do I have to jump over to do what I got to do? And then I get to a point where like, you know what, that's one too many.
So when our process, we start with a needs assessment from teachers and families. So we talk to teachers, what are you all seeing or hearing from families or seeing with students that you think we could help meet this need by doing some technology education with parents? And then we do the same thing with families, like what do you want to learn more about? As a result of that, we have had very varied tools that we've covered. We talked about how to use Google Translate to have a conversation with your child's doctor. We talked about how to use different technology tools to help with public transportation, to use the camera translate features to read the ingredients label at the grocery store, to do money conversions, like all of these different things. That those were some of the needs that these parents needed, because it's not just the academic, we're helping with life skills. We collaborated with the IRC because they were in the know for our community.
What's IRC?
Oh, sorry, International Rescue Committee. That's
Sorry,
it.
just double checking.
Yeah, we're in Port Charlottesville's a hub,
Right.
so
Yeah,
we get
so
a lot
we
of
want-
refugee families.
Right. So does Harrisonburg,
Yeah,
but
you
I
guys
didn't
do.
know
Yeah.
you're an acronym.
Yeah.
So we worked with them to see what specific information they thought that families might need for the circumstances that they saw, because they were more boots on the ground working with
Right.
the family's home life situations. And we got tips from our interpreters to help us with putting together the nuts and bolts of our presentation. We present on topics of interest to families using the interpreter. So for our sessions, we use Zoom with the live interpretation. So families can join and select their audio channel based on the language that they need. I will say this is an important thing, because this is where not letting perfection get in the way of progress was a big deal, because you are not going to get an interpreter every single time for every single language that you have represented in your district. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
So
we have way more than whatever languages we have.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So we went and just tried to get like our top 3. Like, so we made sure that we had Spanish, Arabic, and Korean. Like those were our 3 that we were pulling forward to have.
The other thing too that goes with the interpreters is that sometimes we had some people who were willing to practice. So it wasn't even just necessarily like your stock interpreters, but there are people who want to practice their skills of interpreting.
Yeah.
And so that's a resource as well that goes with that. And then the other thing that I thought about is that, actually there's 2 things. The humility that you're bringing to the table when you realize you don't know it all. You're not going to assume all these things. And you can't you can't provide all the resources. You're gonna have to work with other people, and that can be humbling for people at times. But the other thing that I think about is that our partnership isn't just with the families, right? So we're in a partnership with our interpreters, and that led to some beautiful discoveries on our end as well. Like, because you're working with the families, they're bringing something to the table. The interpreters are also bringing stuff to the table, and then the IRC was helping. So all of these different relationships were happening to move us forward.
We also make sure that we follow up with individual questions with who the right person is at the school. And for us, we realized that that's not just saying like, oh, reach out to your guidance counselor for more information about that, right? We, after the program, will send an email that includes the parent and the person at the school in English, and then we just do a quick translated copy in the same email to go ahead and start that conversation so that that communication's already going. It's not something then that the parent has to push past to start on their own, but then we stepped out of it, right? So again, it's that we're empowering them, like, all right, we've established the communication, here you go. Like, we're helping that teacher and that parent be able to then communicate back and forth with each other. Some specific tips and strategies for building this type of presentation. Share ahead of time with your interpreters so that they can have any specific language needs figured out, because sometimes with technology stuff, there is very specialized vocabulary. Like when we were going over Seesaw, our Mandarin interpreter was like, I need to research how to explain a portfolio, because that wasn't a concept that she knew how to explain. Because sometimes when you are doing an interpretation, it's not just what the word is. Sometimes it involves explanation, because parents are going to ask questions like, what does that mean?
Yeah, and I had a similar experience when I was trying to talk about Power School. And so I was talking with one of our Spanish interpreters, and that was part of the reason that I began to realize that this partnership was much bigger than just with families. Because as I'm talking with Frankie, and we're talking about things, she's asking me different questions about Power School. And then she said, I wasn't quite, because even when you give a slide deck, there still may be gaps that come, right? And so just in our having conversation, and sometimes that conversation happened before our sessions, sometimes it would happen after. And so, but being in a partnership, realizing that everybody's bringing something to the table to be able to help people be empowered it's very big.
Make sure that you have Zoom instructions in multiple languages in your slideshow at the beginning, so that it's explained how to select your language room in different languages, not just in English. That was one that we learned right away with pictures for how to click.
Pictures and screenshots are huge, right? And so Windows Shift S was one of our popularly used tools, right? But you're taking screenshots of things and showing them where to click and where to go, and putting that at the beginning of your presentation.
Know when to pause for interpretation. So if you've ever experienced live interpretation on Zoom, these people are on top of their game, because they're listening in English in one ear and speaking it out at the same time in the other language.
It's crazy how.
Right. Like if you even stop for a second to think about something, you're already lost in the conversation. Right. So they asked, they were like, especially because we did have people who were practicing, they would say, can you pause and give us a chance to catch up? So then doing that when you're speaking, but then also if you're playing a video, make sure that you're pausing the video so that the interpreters have a chance to catch up.
Yeah, and with those videos, there are a couple of things that we try to use videos that have closed captioning in them. So that's a big piece to it. The other piece is trying to get that pause right so that the text is somewhat still on the screen to help the interpreters is another piece. And then also adjusting the playback speed of a YouTube video can be a huge thing, and just teaching them that little thing, slow it down a little bit, right? And so that can also be a way of helping not just you during this, but also in the classroom setting, slowing your videos down sometimes, or teaching them how to do it if you're giving them an assignment so they know how to use that. Again, that's empowering them to be able to help themselves down the road with that. And one of the things that I got from Charlie was that in Zoom, so when we do the breakout rooms and with the or not breakout rooms, but we do the interpreter rooms, right? You can see the interpreters. And so what I started doing, thanks to Charlie, was I would talk, and then I would pause, and then I would watch the interpreter. And while the interpreter was still talking, I kept quiet. When the interpreter finished, I would start again. And that helped me to work out my timing. I mean, it is enough to just do like wedding vow, kind of like, you say it, and then someone else says it. Yeah, it was actually having that visual representation also helped with being able to do that.
Speak to the family member, not to the interpreter.
Mhm.
So instead of, can you ask Ms. Gonzalez, blah, 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 you would speak to her, and then the interpreter is just there to help. They're not,
Mhm.
you're not having a conversation with the interpreter about this. And that helps with that relationship building piece, because then it doesn't feel like the relationship is going through a third party. Also, partner with other departments. So if you think of other departments that might benefit from being able to reach these families, like if you had transportation come in to talk about school buses, if you had nutrition come in to talk about meals at school, or I mean, any type of department that you work with. SPED has partnered with us before about different things. So just think about taking advantage of those opportunities. We included flyers for sharing, presentations that we have used before, recordings for reference. You could watch one of our meetings, and some of the surveys that we use for reflecting and planning with families and teachers.
And that's also, as I said earlier, there's probably other resources that we didn't list the exhaustive list. So if you're getting ready to do something, we're happy to share what we have or what we've been doing. And again, when I thought about this, and I was on the other side of like beginning this thing, it can seem really overwhelming and daunting to say you're gonna start to do something, because you could just get lost in it. But the thing that I keep coming back to is I think about the student who's being left behind, because we haven't done anything. We haven't done anything to help them. And they're being left behind. And then I ask myself, how in the world can I ignore that when I know that this is happening?
And when you think about the equity gaps that can happen, even just if instructions go out to a class and then you're having to wait a week to get it back from the translation department to then get the instructions sent to some of your other students, like that's an equity issue, right? Because now they've fallen behind, they're not getting the same amount of time. And when you think about like credit recovery right now in the secondary schools, like that's an issue. We did gain momentum. We started small, things built, people around our division started really championing this and supporting this. It became part of our strategic action plan for not just our department, but in our division. We saw increased publicity and marketing happening. We built stronger community partnerships. Then suddenly it wasn't just us reaching out to community groups. It was them reaching out to us saying like, hey, can you guys maybe help us with this piece? And that gave us more time with our families, which just increased those relationships. We also had the addition of school-based programs who started taking this on for just their school community to do school-specific things. One school went out into the community, going to the community center, so parents didn't have to travel anywhere. They could go to that community center, and they had like a menu that parents could, or family members could check off that they needed help with. I need help setting up a voicemail. I need help setting up an email address. I need help with this. I have a question about this tool. And then they had interpreters there. The tech people were there, and we helped them. Mm-hmm. So it can start however you want it to. Just start somewhere.
And that's what I would tell you. It's the right thing to do for the students you have and the families that are within your population. It just is. And what I love about what Charlie just shared is that they don't all look the same. And so even the resources we have, it may spark something new and that fits for your community. And part of that also comes into play when you are inviting the other people in and you're listening to them as they come in, they may have ideas about like what works for them, right? And they're bringing that to the table. So it isn't just like we have to be the know-it-all stage on the stage or sage on the stage kind of thing. It's a partnership. And the thing that is maybe for some people might be humbling is like not having that sense of like, okay, next month we're going to talk about this, this, and this. Well, the way we do it is that at the end of our session, we give a survey and then we get feedback about what they're looking for. And then that helps to drive what we do for the next piece, right?
Some other things that we have worked with our department to do is ensure that technology can go back and forth between home and school for our ESOL students, so that we are not hindered by what technology access they have at home. We also cover tools like Snap and Read that we use at school that can do translation and read aloud services through the tools, so that if we send stuff home to families, that they now have the tools that they need, that they can translate it, they can have it read aloud, so that doesn't become a barrier to access. And that's that empowerment piece again, is that way it's not just coming from us and they're not just waiting until a translated version gets sent home. They've got the tools that they need to get it translated, interpreted, and read aloud right there.
And one of the things that I thought was pretty amazing is that if you, and we shared this with our families, but if it's a Google Doc and it's written in English, you can have it translated pretty fast. Like it's almost instantaneous. And then what I would usually do is say at the bottom of it, on the teacher side, put the disclaimer that this was used with Google Translate or whatever it is that you were using, and say, so some of the things may not be fully accurate. But again, I'd much rather them have a sense of what's coming where they can take the document and feel empowered enough to switch it over and see what's coming versus I get a document in English and have to wait forever for it to get translated, or they don't get anything at all, right?
Because it doesn't, like we said, we have 84 languages. Stuff does not get translated into 84 different languages.
What's your, if you send out something district-wide, what is the normal max? We have 12 that we send out. We will, if it's going out to every student house, then we do 12 languages.
Usually,
I'm not sure what
I
our
think
cap
we
is.
even get up, I think you guys might be ahead of us with that. I think I have seen stuff in 6 different languages, and I think then we kind of stop there.
Yeah.
We're at 12 right now.
Mhm.
But
But imagine too, like if you get these partnerships going, right? One of the things that I had a fascinating experience with was when I was working with our anti-racism orientation, and we were translating it into Spanish, and I was working with Monica. And one of the things that was really cool about this was that imagine if you have relationships with your families and there is someone in that family that is bilingual. And all of a sudden they become an incredible asset for your partnership, right? And working and figuring these things out. But you may never know that if we never reach out and none of this stuff starts happening. I still think, to me, what's really neat is when you see a kid who walks in and all of a sudden, this is my school. Like that's the feeling that they're getting when all of a sudden you are making space for them at the table. And not just saying we've made space, but you are an honored guest at our table, right? You belong here, and starting to convey that message of across the board. So even like when your flyers and advertisements, I think representation matters. So even when you're doing your flyers, think about what you're putting out there and how it's represented, right? Who are the people you use if you're using people in your flyers?
if families know that you care enough to ensure that they understand what's happening, that's a big piece. Do you guys have any questions for us?
Can you go back a couple slides? I just want to take I know I'll receive the,
No,
Bitly.
okay.
You
Oh, that's
went
at the
really
end.
fast.
Oh, there
And I
you
went, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I
I think we were both.
Yeah.
You were, it's all good. Oh, you're fine.
Do all elementary students take home their devices or only the ELL students?
Okay, so in our district, fourth and fifth graders can take theirs freely back and forth. For K through 3, it's with permission from the principals, but we got permission for all ELL students to be able to take theirs back and forth. And that way, especially over school breaks, they can practice their English language learning tools and have access to the tools that we use.
And we also saw too, that there were some families who, even though they were able to take it home, were reluctant to either get a device or take a device home, because they were concerned about the damage that might happen to the device and being held responsible for it. So that is something too that you have to navigate and work through, but just be aware that that is a real thing too, where people are like, no, we don't want to take that. That looks expensive. We might break it and we don't have money to pay for it if it gets broken.
Yes.
Has anyone found a translation app for Persian that includes audio?
Oh, that's a good question.
That includes audio?
That includes audio. So
That includes audio.
So I'm going to put a slide up, have them email me that question,
Oh,
because
yeah,
what I
that'd be
can
fine.
do is I can research that and let them know. Let's see. So there's, I'm Charlie. If they email me, then I will research that and get back to them.
Mhm.
That's a very good question. We had that issue a little bit too with Swahili.
Yeah.
Was another language, because the audio language for when it would get read aloud would be very robotic. It was not,
Mhm.
especially young student user friendly.
She got it. She says, thanks, will do.
Okay. And that's even playing with the settings where you could vary the speed and things. It's still tough.
But again, like, and this is a big thing with where you can say on there that you're using Google Translate to translate the text, but something is better than nothing. And it's, again, it's that not letting perfection get in the way of progress.
And yeah, I put this slide in there. This is how I felt after, or how I feel after each one. Let's see where it goes back to. I really feel like, there we go. This picture right here. Like I feel and like that. Like I feel like we haven't done anything overly significant, but at the same time, the efforts and then things that they're sharing back and forth with us is like exponentially like, whoa, and we're like, wow, we didn't really expect that positive reaction that we were getting. But it's just been so amazing. And I think about like, again, the times that they're like, you're doing this for us. This event is for us. And I'm thinking, you're part of
Well,
our
and a big thing is when our
Yeah.
superintendent came in to say hello to the families and say that he was glad to see them there, that, seeing that type of buy-in from, district leadership, that they care about these families too.
Mhm.
Like, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Because once families feel that, then they're so much more comfortable getting involved at a school level.
Mhm. One of the things that I was thinking about was that when I'm going to put together like a slide deck for our family nights. So I think we talked about it, less is more, but that also deals with when you're conveying an idea. All right, so less is more as far as like what you put on your slides for them to see. The screenshots and the pictures are a very big deal. I use arrows and I use like little circles to focus to where they're going. Those are other things that just help. And it doesn't help. It's also helpful to just have someone else look at it and make sure that what you're conveying doesn't have like what we were talking about.
No idioms.
Idioms, yeah.
No
Yeah.
idioms.
Yeah.
Clear, concise, simple English. Like, there is a time to make things very
Mhm.
flowery and fancy language and all of this, a very creative writing. This is not one of
Not
those
that time.
times.
Nope.
The other thing is when your Zoom is over, if you're doing it by Zoom, if that's one of the avenues you choose, you may have families that are hanging out with you for a little while or whatever it is, right? And so I was thinking about this because my wife was watching the movie Aaron Brockovich, and basically the guy came in and the families offered him a cup of coffee and he was just gonna leave. And then Aaron was like, no, you need to have a cup of coffee with these people, hang out with them. But part of what she was trying to say is that if you're in a relationship with people, you're gonna spend time with them. And that's gonna help foster the relationship, which comes back to the trust piece. Trust is big, right? We even talked about like if we were to invite people or made it to come to one of our sessions, but we also thought about the environment, like that trust piece, right? And so and we didn't want our families to be on show either. So just remember that as you're doing things, most of the time you're either doing things that are going to increase the trust that you have with the people you're working with, or it's going to reduce that trust. And so make conscious decisions to increase the trust with the people you're working with.
And when you're going over a tool specifically, if you're showing how a tool works, if the cognitive load for picking this up and understanding how it works is pretty high, keep the language load very low.
You guys
That's
have any other
it for us.
questions?
You guys have any more questions? We're happy to answer. Do we have anything from Zoom? If
Anything in the
not,
chat?